The board under my hand had gone soft the way wood goes soft after enough winters of salt fog. Not rotten exactly, more like the memory of wood, still holding its shape but no good for standing on. I had the old one pried halfway up and a new length of cedar cut to fit beside it, and I was working the second nail in when I stopped to drink coffee that had already gone cold on the rail post an hour before. I drank it anyway. Cold coffee tasted like something, and most mornings out here I was working on finding things that tasted like something. The house sat where my father had put it 30 years ago, on a shelf of basalt above a beach that ran black instead of tan, backed by a seawall his surveyor had talked him into and he'd never once needed. Highway 101 ran behind the house and above it, and in October it carried maybe 6 cars an hour, tourists who'd gotten the season wrong, log trucks, nothing that slowed. 12 miles north was Morrow, which had a gas station and a diner and not much reason to go there. I hadn't been in 17 days. I knew that because I'd started marking days without deciding to, the way you notice you're counting something only after you've already been counting it a while. 4 months. My apartment lease in Portland had run out the same week Dad had the stroke that killed him, and somewhere in the arrangements and the hospital hallways and the folding of a life down into a phone call, I had simply not gone back to sign a new one. There hadn't been a decision in it. There'd been a box of his shirts I hadn't finished sorting, sitting in the second bedroom with the closet door still open, and a job in Portland I hadn't called about in so long that not calling had become its own kind of answer. I told people when anyone asked that I was handling things. Nobody asked anymore. I set the hammer down on the rail post next to the nails and the coffee, and looked out past the ocean the way I did every 10 minutes or so without meaning to, and that was when I saw it. Something at the base of the seawall, down where the black sand met the basalt, 40 feet below me and mostly the wrong angle to see well from a bluff. My first thought was log. The tide brought in whole trees some winters, root balls and all, tossed them up against that wall like it was nothing, and my second thought should have been that, and stayed that, except the log-shaped thing at the base of the wall shifted. Not a wave moving it. I watched another 2 or 3 seconds to be sure, because from this height the surf could throw enough spray to fool you, could rock a piece of driftwood in a way that looked almost alive if you wanted it to. But this wasn't the whole shape rocking. It was smaller than that, a tightening somewhere in the middle of it, a small muscular adjustment. I stood there a while longer than I should have, the hammer still in my hand, the nail I hadn't driven still standing up out of the new board at an angle. I told myself it could be a seal. Seals hauled up on beaches like that sometimes, sick or hurt, and lay still enough to be mistaken for driftwood by anyone who wasn't paying attention. I was paying attention now. I watched for the shape to move again, and it didn't. Not for a long 10 count. And I found that I'd already set the hammer down on the post, next to the nails and the cold coffee without deciding to do that either. The path down went around the north face of the bluff, cut into it a long time before my father ever bought the place, switchbacking through scrub grass and stunted spruce that had given up trying to grow straight in that wind. It was steep enough that I kept a hand out for the exposed rock on the high side, and wet enough. Everything on this coast in October was wet. The ground never really dried out between one rain and the next, that my boots slid twice on the way down, once badly enough that I put a hand flat against the basalt to catch myself. At the bottom, the trail gave out into sand that had gone soft and black and cold with the tide just starting to pull back off it. Sand soft enough that my boots left prints straight through to the darker wet layer underneath, each one filling slightly at the edges before I'd even taken the next step. I could hear the surf clearer down here, that steady collapsing sound it made against the seawall, and under it, or maybe just imagined under it, something that might have been breathing. I reached the base of the path and stepped out onto the black sand and started walking toward the shape at the wall. He wasn't a log, and he wasn't a seal. He was a man, sitting with his back against the seawall and his knees drawn up in front of him like he'd folded himself down as small as he could manage and then run out of the strength to go any smaller. His shirt was cut through on the left side, a long dark line under the torn fabric that I didn't want to look at too closely yet, and both his hands lay open on his knees, palms up, the skin scraped off them down to something raw and shining. He wasn't moving except to breathe. His eyes were open. I crouched in front of him and said something. I don't remember exactly what. The kind of thing you say without thinking. Hey, can you hear me? And his eyes came up to mine slow, like they had a long way to travel. Did you fall? I said. Off the bluff, off the rocks up the coast. He didn't answer that. His head turned instead just slightly toward the north, toward the dark line where the beach ran out and the forest came down close to the water. And he looked at that for a second like it meant something to him that it didn't mean to me. I need to be inside, he said. His voice came out low and even, more control in it than I expected from a man with his ribs laid open. Not a hospital. Inside. I didn't argue with him. Getting him up the path took both of us, all of what he had left and most of what I had. He got an arm around my shoulder and I got a hand under his good side, and we went up that switchback slow, one wet stone at a time, him breathing through his teeth on the steep parts, and he never once asked where I was taking him. He just went where I put my weight, matched it, corrected for it, not overwhelmed, managing it. I got him through the back door and onto the couch, and he lay there a second with his eyes shut while I went for the bathroom cabinet, my hands already running through the short list of things Dad had kept under the sink. Gauze, tape, the brown bottle of peroxide gone half flat with age, a roll of butterfly strips I hadn't touched since I moved in and hadn't thrown out either. The wound ran a good 4 inches along his lower ribs, and I made myself look at it properly instead of flinching from it the way I wanted to. It was long enough that my stomach turned looking at the length of it, but it wasn't deep. Nothing underneath it looked wrong in the ways that would have meant real trouble. I cleaned it out while he sat there and let me, not flinching, not once, and by the time I'd gotten the last butterfly strip pressed down along the edge of it, he was breathing slow and steady, and his eyes had gone from that half-present blur to something sharp and present and watching me work. "Colton Morgan," he said when I'd finished like I'd asked, and he was only now getting around to answering. "That's my name." I told him mine. He nodded like it confirmed something he already suspected rather than gave him new information, and he didn't ask me anything about the wound, how bad it was, whether he needed stitches, whether I thought he'd live. He just sat there on my father's couch with his ribs wrapped and his hands scraped raw in his lap, calm in a way that had no business matching what I'd just cleaned off him. "How long has your family had this place?" he said. "My father's," I said. "He owned it 30 years. I sat back on my heels, the bloody gauze balled up in one hand. "He died 4 months ago. My lease in Portland ran out that same week. I never went back for it. I've been here since." I said it the way I say most things about my father now, which is flat, the way you'd report on someone else's life rather than your own. A fact filed under other facts, no different in weight from the 30 years or the peroxide bottle. I wasn't offering it to him. Colton nodded once at that, slow, and didn't say anything back. "No, I'm sorry for your loss. No, that must have been hard. Nothing that would have made me feel managed or handled." He just sat with it, his wrapped ribs rising and falling under the shirt I'd have to throw out later, steady now in a way they hadn't been on the beach. His eyes moved once, off me, off the couch, over to the window on the far wall, the one that didn't look at the ocean at all, the one that looked back at the tree line where the spruce started, and held there a moment before coming back to rest, unhurried, somewhere in the middle distance of the room. His eyes stayed on that window a while, and I found myself looking where he was looking, out past my own reflection to the tree line beyond the yard. 40 yards of grass and salal, and then the spruce started, old growth, trunks wide enough that two people couldn't join hands around them, hemlock mixed in dark enough that 50 feet in, you couldn't have told me if it was noon or dusk. I'd looked at that tree line every day for 6 months the way you look at a wall. It was just where the yard ended. "You ever notice anything out there?" Colton said. "At night. Sounds. Shapes moving that shouldn't." "No," I said, and I meant it. "I haven't paid it much attention." He nodded slowly, like that answer told him something too, the same way the first one had. "That's going to change tonight," he said. He didn't say anything else right away. He just sat there with his hands loose in his lap, the raw skin on his palms catching the light from the window. And I waited because it was clear he wasn't finished. He was just deciding how to say the rest of it. "The forest doesn't end at the tree line," he said finally, and it came out slower than the rest, like the words cost him something to spend. "It goes much deeper than the trees." I didn't ask him what that meant right away. I got up and put on a pot of coffee instead, because it gave my hands something to do. He told it to me in pieces over the whole morning, sitting on my father's couch with his ribs wrapped and his voice level the entire time. No rise in it, no drop, like he was giving me directions to a town. There were 2 groups, he said, that had lived inside the forest for longer than anyone kept records of, longer than the state had existed, longer than the roads. Not tribes in the way I'd have first assumed, not anything I could look up. His people held a particular relationship with the woods, something maintained rather than inherited, that let them live inside it without the forest taking anything back from them that they weren't willing to give. He said this the way you describe a lease. Terms, conditions, something you kept up on. The other group he called the deep forest people. He said the name flatly, no weight put on it, the way you'd name a species of bird. "They crossed something," he said. "A line. It made them something other than what they were." He looked at his own hands when he said it, at the scraped meat of his palms, and then back up at me. "They're moving toward the coast now. It has a direction the same way a flood has a direction. A cause behind it. It's not a mystery. It's just a condition." He never once said the word supernatural, and he never reached for anything that would have let me picture it easier. No, this is like, no, imagine. He just laid the facts down flat and let me do what I wanted with them. "That's insane," I said, because it was, and because I needed to hear myself say it out loud to see if it held. Why would any of this have anything to do with me? "This house sits on the western edge of contested ground," he said. "They already know someone's in it." He said it plainly, the way you'd tell someone their car needed a new alternator, and that was worse than if he'd tried to scare me on purpose. He looked like a man reporting a fact he wished were different and wasn't going to pretend otherwise. He couldn't get up off that couch without wincing through it, so he stayed the rest of the day, and I fed him. A can of soup I'd been saving for no reason since my father died. Bread that was a day past good. Coffee I kept refilling without asking if he wanted more. We talked in stretches with long gaps between them, gaps where he'd just sit and look toward that back window, and I'd sit and try not to watch him do it. What got me wasn't the shape of what he was telling me. 2 peoples in the woods, one of them gone wrong. Territory moving like weather. Put like that, in a sentence, it sounded like something you'd hear from a man who'd walked off his medication. But he never told it to me like that, in a sentence. He told it to me across 3 hours in small pieces that all lined up with each other, the same names holding the same weight every time he used them. No detail arriving twice in 2 different shapes. He didn't perform any of it. He didn't lean toward me on the parts that should have landed hardest, didn't pull back on the parts that should have scared him. Colton built nothing. He just kept setting down the same flat stones in the same order, and by early afternoon I noticed I'd stopped waiting for one of them to wobble. I put the coffee pot on again around 4, more out of habit than need, and Colton shifted himself upright against the arm of the couch, careful of the ribs, breath going shallow, and then even again once he'd found the angle that didn't hurt. I set a second mug of coffee on the side table next to him and sat down across from him in my father's chair, and neither of us said anything for a while, the sound of the Pacific coming faint and steady through the walls the way it always did, like the house was still breathing even with everything he'd just told me sitting in the room between us. Colton slept on the couch that night, or something close to sleeping, and in the morning I unwrapped the strips over his ribs to check the wound the way you'd check a bandage on anyone, out of habit, not expectation. It wasn't supposed to look like that. Not yet. The skin around the cut had gone from raw and swollen to something closer to a scrape a week old, pink instead of red, the edges pulled tighter than they'd been the night before. I'd cleaned that wound myself. I knew what it looked like at hour 0, and I knew what it should look like at hour 12, and this wasn't that. This was days of healing folded into half a day. I didn't say anything. I put a fresh strip over it and told him it looked fine, which was true in the way that a lie can be built entirely out of true words. And he thanked me and didn't ask what I meant by fine, and that was the end of it. He was quieter that morning than he'd been the day before, like the talking had cost him something and he was making it back slow. We didn't touch the subject again. The two peoples in the woods, the territory, none of it. And I found I didn't want to push him toward it either. Not because I doubted what he'd said, but because I'd started to believe it, and believing it made the silence between us feel like the only sane thing in the room. Around evening, he got up off the couch on his own, no wincing this time, and went to the back door. "I'm going to step outside," he said, not asking permission, just telling me, the way you'd tell someone you were going to check the mail. I watched him from the kitchen window. He walked to the middle of the deck, the side that faced the tree line, and he stopped there and didn't move for what I counted, without meaning to count it, as close to 2 full minutes. He wasn't looking at anything. His eyes weren't tracking the trees or the dark spaces between them. He just stood with his face angled slightly toward the forest and his head tipped a fraction, and it took me a while to understand what I was watching. He was listening, the way you listen to a room you can't see into, waiting for a sound you already know the shape of. Then he turned and came back in, favoring the ribs a little on the step up, and shut the door behind him. "Nothing's close yet," he said. He said it the way he said everything, flat and certain. No comfort offered because none had been asked for, and he went and sat back down on the couch like he'd just checked the weather. I noticed the sound thing twice that day, and both times I told myself I'd imagined it, and both times I hadn't. The first was when he stood near the window before going outside, the wind off the water which had been steady all day, a low constant push against the glass, just went quiet, not stopped, dropped, the way a radio drops when you turn the volume down instead of off. The second time was later that evening, after he'd come back in, when he walked past that same pane of glass on his way to the couch, and it happened again. That same small hush, gone almost as soon as it started, the surf coming back up under it a second later like nothing had happened at all. I didn't say anything to him about it. I don't know what I would have said. There was nothing to point to. But I filed it next to the wound healing wrong, and the two of them together started to weigh more than either one alone. He went to lie back down not long after full dark, moving carefully, one hand near his ribs out of what I now understood might just be habit rather than need. And he said goodnight in a way that assumed I'd be doing the same, and I said I would, and I didn't. I sat at the kitchen table instead, facing the back window, my father's chair pulled around wrong for the first time since I'd started sitting in it, and I watched the tree line the way you watch a pot that isn't boiling yet. The spruce and hemlock behind the house run dense enough that even at midday there's a stretch 50 feet in where the light doesn't reach the ground, and I'd walked past that tree line 100 times in 6 months without once wondering what it did after dark. I wondered now. The last of the daylight thinned out gray and then blue, and the trees held their shape a while longer than the sky did, black cutouts against a sky that was going black too, and I kept my eyes on the place where the two blacks met, waiting for one of them to move. Nothing did. The surf kept its rhythm below the bluff, steady, indifferent, the house settling the way it always settled once the wind picked up off the water for the night. No shapes came out of the trees. No sound dropped out from under the ordinary sound of the coast. I sat there with my hands flat on the table and told myself that watching a tree line was not, on its own, a useful thing to be doing, and I kept doing it anyway. The daylight goes entirely and the tree line disappears into the dark, and I am still sitting at the kitchen table watching the place where it was. I don't know how long I sat there before it happened. Long enough that the table had gone hard under my forearms, and the coffee I'd forgotten was on the counter had gone cold enough not to matter. At some point I must have slept, because the next thing I knew I was already moving, already up out of the chair, and the voice was still hanging in the air behind me like it hadn't finished saying my name. Caden. The particular rise on the first half and the drop on the second, the exact roughness that 4 months in a Portland hospital bed hadn't taken out of him even at the end. The specific way Dad said my name when he was standing in a doorway, making sure I was still breathing and not calling me to come look at something. I would have known that voice in a stadium full of shouting men. I knew it in my sleep. I was at the back door with my hand already on the latch before any part of my mind caught up to my body, and some part of me that wasn't thinking at all was already forming the word Dad, already halfway into a doorway that had been empty for 4 months, going toward a sound the way you go toward your own name. Colton's hand closed on my arm before I got the latch turned. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His grip was not gentle, and it was not asking, and it pulled me back a full step from the door before I understood I'd been stopped. And even then, some animal part of my chest wanted to keep going, wanted to shake him off, because that was my father's voice out there on the deck, and every year I had spent in that house believing I knew what it sounded like had just been proven right. The voice came again. Caden. The same word. Almost the same. But this time there was a hitch in it, a half-beat too long riding the front of the name, a fraction of a second stretched out where my father had never once stretched it, not in 37 years, not sick, not dying, not ever. It was such a small thing. It was the kind of wrongness that would pass by anyone who hadn't spent a childhood in the next room listening for exactly that word said exactly that way. But I had. And the second it landed on me, I went cold all the way through. A cold that had nothing to do with the temperature in the kitchen, and I stopped moving entirely. My hand was still up near the latch. I didn't lower it. I didn't reach for it again either. Colton didn't move his hand off my arm. He just held on and waited and watched the door the way you'd watch a stove burner you weren't sure had gone out. The third time it tried, the voice added something my father never said. It got my name right that time. Near enough. But then it kept going, past where it should have stopped, into a sentence with words in it that were shaped like something a person says, a phrase with the right rhythm and none of the right weight, generic in a way that made my stomach turn. My father did not fill space with filler. He said what he meant in as few words as it took, and then he was done, and whatever was on the other side of that door had run out of him after 2 words, and was reaching for something to say next, the way a man reaches for a shelf in the dark, grabbing whatever his hand found. It found the wrong thing. It sounded like a recording spliced together from parts that almost matched, and once I heard the seam, I couldn't unhear it. And the whole thing that had been my father's voice for 3 full seconds became, all at once and completely, something else's voice wearing it. It didn't come a 4th time. The silence after it stopped was total in a way the house's silence never was, the kind that makes you aware of the specific things missing rather than the specific things present. And I stood there with my hand still near the latch, not lowering it, not reaching for it, waiting for the sound to come back so I could hear exactly how wrong it would get. It didn't come back. After a while, I don't know how long, my sense of time had gone loose and useless, The surf came back into the room, first as something at the edge of hearing and then as itself, steady, unbothered, exactly what it had been before any of this started, as if the ocean hadn't noticed and wasn't going to start now. Colton let go of my arm. He didn't say anything about what had just happened. He didn't ask if I was all right, and he didn't explain what had made the sound or where it had gone, or whether it would try again some other night in some other voice. He crossed to the table and sat down in the dark the way you'd sit down after a long drive, and after a moment I did the same, my legs working like they belonged to someone else, and neither of us turned on a light. I kept waiting to be afraid. I ran the sound of it back in my head, the wrong stretch on the first syllable, the seam where the real thing ended and the filler began, and each time I ran it back what came up in me wasn't fear. It was something narrower than that and colder, and it didn't shake. It just sat there behind my sternum with its hands folded, exact and patient. Something out there had reached into my life and taken the one sound in it I would have known anywhere, and it had gotten most of the way there, and then it hadn't finished the job. I sat at the table in the dark with my hands flat in front of me the way they'd been flat all evening, watching a tree line that never moved. Not that it had tried. That it had tried and failed and used him doing it. I didn't say any of that to Colton. I didn't think he needed me to. We sat in the dark kitchen, the surf coming back through the walls the way it always did, steady, indifferent, and my hand was in my lap now, nowhere near the latch, and the anger stayed exactly where it had settled, quiet, precise, and entirely mine. I don't know how long we sat at that table, but at some point the anger went slack enough to let sleep in, and when I opened my eyes again, it was because the dark in the kitchen had changed shape. Colton was already up. He stood facing the back of the house with his weight even on both feet, the stillness of a man listening to something I couldn't hear, and I understood before anything moved that whatever we'd been waiting for wasn't coming. It was already here. I got up off the couch without deciding to. My legs did it on their own, the way they had 2 nights before. The back door didn't break. I'd braced for the sound of splintering wood, the door slamming open on its hinges, something fast and violent and over quick. Instead, the whole frame bowed inward, slow, the wood groaning along its entire length like a ship's hull taking swell, and I understood with a kind of sick clarity that nothing was hitting the door. Something was leaning on it. All of it, at once, patient. The way you'd lean on a gate you knew would eventually give. It gave. 3 of them came through in the space of a breath, and the wrongness of them hit me before I had time to be afraid of anything else. They were shaped like people the way a drawing done from memory is shaped like a person. Close enough to read. Wrong in every measurement. Torsos too long for the legs under them. Heads set a little too far forward, straining toward you before the rest of the body caught up. And no sound. 3 bodies that size should have filled the kitchen with the thud of feet on tile, and instead there was nothing. Just the door groaning back into its ruined frame, and then quiet, wet-sounding breathing that didn't match anything I'd call breath. Colton moved before I did. He went at the first 2 without a word, without any wind-up I could see, and it was the most economical violence I have ever watched a person perform. No swing wasted, no step retaken, his hands finding places on their bodies like he'd already done this 100 times and simply hadn't told me. For 3 or 4 seconds it looked like enough. I stood flat against the far wall with my back against the cold plaster, useless, watching a man half his life spent training for exactly this, hold 2 of them at bay in my father's kitchen. The 3rd one went around him. I didn't see it cross the room. I registered it the way you register weather. A change in the air behind me and then the blow itself, flat and wide across my upper back. Nothing like a fist, more like being struck full length with a plank swung by someone who didn't need to aim. It put me into the counter edge first, and then onto the floor, and the impact took the air and most of the light out of the room at once. I was still trying to get a breath back into my chest when the window went. It didn't shatter so much as leave. The whole side window came into the kitchen, still wearing its frame, glass and wood and aluminum track arriving together. And behind it, something came through that was bigger than any of the three that had come through the door, moving with a speed that had no business belonging to something that size. It hit the third figure, the one that had put me on the floor, and drove it into the far wall with a sound that wasn't a fight sound at all. It was structural. It was the sound of a car meeting something that doesn't move. Colton said a name into all of it. Sharp, not loud, but carrying. A name I'd never heard him say before and didn't catch clean enough to hold on to. The kitchen filled up with motion and noise and the smell of the night coming straight in through the hole where the window had been, cold and full of salt. And for those few seconds, I couldn't have told you how many things were in the room or where any of them were. Then it stopped. All at once, the way a held breath stops. The two Colton had been fighting were gone. Through the door, I think, though I didn't see them leave. The third was gone too, and where it had been there was a dent in the drywall and a smear on the floor that I didn't look at too closely. And standing in the wreck of the window frame, glass under her feet, was something that resolved, as I watched, into the outline of a person. Big. Bigger than Colton by a lot. Bigger than the men who'd come through the door, but built like a person, moving now with none of the speed she'd just shown, only a stillness that made the earlier speed hard to believe in. Colton said something to her, low and fast, words I couldn't separate into a language I knew. She said something back, 3 words, maybe 4, in a voice I didn't catch either. It didn't take long. Whatever passed between them was already settled by the second exchange, and then she turned and went back out through the space where the window used to be, as easily as she'd come in, and the cold air kept coming through after her like it had been let into the house and had no intention of leaving. I was on the floor. My shirt had torn across the shoulder blade where the blow landed, and under the tear I could feel the skin split, a line of it burning and spreading instead of settling into the ache of a bruise. My heart was going hard enough that I could feel it in my fingertips, a pulse in the pads of them I had never felt before. Colton crossed the kitchen and crouched down beside me, glass crunching once under his knee, the broken window at his back, letting the whole black weight of the night into the room behind him. His hands were steady on my back, which was the thing I noticed first, more than the pain, more than the cold coming in through the hole where the window used to be. Steady hands, cutting the torn shirt away from the wound with a kitchen knife he must have picked up off the counter without my seeing him do it. "This one's yours," he said, meaning her, meaning whatever had come through the glass and gone back out through it. "The one that hit you wasn't." What was it? "One of the deep forest people." He said it the way he'd said everything else, flat, no weight added to make it land harder than it needed to. "What they carry is in you now, in the wound." I sat there on the floor of my father's kitchen with glass under one hand and let that sit in the air for a second before I asked him what I actually wanted to know. "So what do I do?" "There's a window. Until morning, maybe. You drive inland, past the coast range, out of the forest's range entirely, and it doesn't take hold. You'd be clean." "And if I don't?" "It accelerates on its own." He'd found gauze somewhere, or maybe it had been in his pocket the whole time, folded small, and he was pressing it flat against the cut across my shoulder blade with a pressure that hurt in a way that felt almost good, like it was doing something instead of just burning. "Accelerates into what?" I said. He didn't answer right away. His hands didn't stop moving. "The same thing my people are," he said, "which is not the same thing they are." That's not an answer. It's the only part of it I can give you right now. I wanted to push on that, but there was something in the way he said it. Not evasive, just closed, the way a door is closed rather than locked, that told me pushing wouldn't open it any faster. so I let him wrap the gauze around and tape it, and I watched his face while he did it, waiting for something that would tell me more than his words were telling me, and found nothing there but the same steadiness he'd had since the beach. "What are your people?" I said. He sat back on his heels for a second, like the question needed room. "We carry the forest," he said, "the way a burn scar carries a fire, shaped by it, changed by it, not destroyed by it." He tied off the gauze and looked at his own hands doing it, the scarring on his palms catching the little bit of light that was left in the kitchen. "You live longer. You heal faster than you should. Your senses go further than they're built to go. You felt some of that already, probably. Your heart in your fingertips." I had felt that. I didn't say so. "But it doesn't stay where it starts," he said. "It asks for more. Always. That's the part nobody tells you going in, because if they told you, you might not go in." He looked at me directly then, which he hadn't been doing much of, working on my back instead. "Staying yourself becomes the job. The whole job. Every day of it. For as long as you live, which is a long time. And if you lose that fight, then you're one of them. Not a different thing. The same thing. Further down the same road, just further than the road was ever supposed to go." He said it without any heat in it, the way you'd describe water finding the lowest point of a field. "They're not a separate species from us. That's the part people get wrong when they hear about it. They're what we are when we stop fighting." The cold kept coming in through the window, carrying the smell of the ocean with it, salt and something colder underneath the salt. I sat there with my back taped up and burning on the floor of a kitchen where I'd eaten breakfast every morning for 6 months, cereal standing at the counter, not even sitting down. "So I have a choice," I said. "You have a choice. Leave clean or stay. If you stay, you choose it. That's different from having it happen to you." He shifted where he sat, glass crunching once under his weight. "You train with us. You learn what we know. You end up part of what holds the line here, at the edge of it, instead of part of what's coming across it." "Why does it matter if I choose it or not? If the end result's the same either way, some kind of change, some kind of not quite human, why does it matter how I got there?" He was quiet longer on that one than he had been on anything else, long enough that I thought he might not answer it at all. "Because the ones who didn't choose are always fighting from behind," he said finally. "They're catching up to something that already happened to them instead of walking into it eyes open. It's a different fight. Worse odds." He said it flat, but there was something under the flatness, some old cost in it. "I learned that the hard way. I don't enjoy knowing it." I didn't ask him what he meant by the hard way. There wasn't room in me for another thing right then, not with the wound on my back going hot in slow pulses that matched my heartbeat, not with the cold air moving through the broken window like it had somewhere to be. I didn't say anything back to him at all. I sat there on the kitchen floor, in the wreckage of the door that had bowed and given, in the smell of the ocean and the smell of my own blood, and the question stayed there between us, unanswered. Colton didn't press me. He sat back against the cabinet across from me, glass crackling faintly under him, and the two of us were quiet there in the wrecked kitchen, the cold coming through the broken window, the choice still unresolved between us. I got up off the kitchen floor at some point when Colton wasn't looking, and I went outside. The deck boards were cold under my feet, and the door I passed through was still hanging wrong on its hinges from where it had bowed and given. I didn't look at it. I went around the side of the house, past the broken window with its curtain moving a little in the wind, out to the bluff, and I stood at the railing. It was the same spot. I knew it without needing to look. My hands remembered where they'd been. 3 days ago, I'd knelt right here with a bag of galvanized nails and a board gone soft and gray with rot, a mug of coffee going cold on the post beside me the way it always did. There was no mug there now, just the railing and my hands on it, and the dark. Below me, the beach ran out flat and black toward the water, the sand catching what little light there was and giving almost none of it back. Dad used to sit down there mornings on the flat rock near the base of the seawall with his own coffee, watching the water do whatever it did that early. Nothing, mostly. He never explained what he was doing down there, and I never asked. I just knew that was where he went. Some mornings when I got up to leave for Portland, I'd see him small and still on that rock through the kitchen window, and I'd think, someday I'll ask him about that. I never did. Now there wasn't anyone left to ask. The lease on the apartment in Portland had run out the week of the second stroke. I remembered getting the notice, some email from the property manager about forwarding fees and a walk-through date. I read it standing in a hospital hallway and understood I wasn't going to deal with it that day. The days kept being not that day until there was no lease left to deal with. The job had gone quiet in the same way. No dramatic resignation, just an away message that never got taken down and a manager who eventually stopped copying me on the emails. In the second bedroom, there were boxes of his things, some sorted and some not. A stack of photographs I'd started putting in order, and then stopped. His reading glasses were still on the nightstand, where he'd left them the last morning he was well enough to leave the house on his own legs. I had let all of it sit. I had let the not deciding decide for me. Then a voice that wasn't his had said my name from the deck 2 nights ago, and something in me had moved before I told it to. It wasn't the fear of it I kept turning over out here at the railing. The fear had come and gone fast. A cold flush and then Colton's hand on my arm, and then it was done. What stayed with me was smaller than that, and sharper. The cadence had been wrong. A half beat too long on the first syllable of my name. Wrong in a way I'd never have caught if I hadn't heard the right version my whole life. My father saying my name from a doorway or a porch or the bottom of the stairs, checking on me, not calling me to anything, just confirming I was there. It had gotten close enough that for 1 second my hand was already on the latch, and then it had reached for something generic, some filler phrase my father never once used in 67 years, and the whole thing had come apart in my hands. What I felt, standing there remembering it, wasn't fear. It was anger, plain and specific, a coal sitting hot in my chest. Something had taken his voice and had not even gotten it right. I stood at the railing a while longer with that feeling in me, not doing anything with it, just letting it sit there. Then I went back inside. Colton was still on the kitchen floor where I'd left him, back against the cabinet, glass ticking faintly under him when he shifted his weight. He looked up when I came through the broken door frame, and he didn't say anything, just watched me the way he'd watched everything since I found him on the beach, steady, unhurried, waiting for me to be the one who spoke first. "I'm not leaving," I said. "Are you certain?" he said. I didn't have anything to give him about purpose or calling or what I thought I was walking toward. I didn't have any of that in me. Not yet, maybe not ever. "I've been in this house for 6 months," I said, "and I haven't been angry about anything until 2 nights ago. That's my answer." He looked at me for a long moment. Not warm, not approving, just calm. Quiet, watching, waiting to see what I'd do next. "Get some sleep," he said. "We start tomorrow." Then he turned away, toward the broken window in the dark beyond it. I stood there in the wrecked kitchen with the decision made and no way to take it back. The wound across my back was still burning in slow pulses, the heat in it exactly the same as it had been an hour ago. The couch had a broken spring somewhere under the left cushion, and I found it with my shoulder blade the moment I lay down, right where the wound was worst. I didn't move. It seemed like the kind of thing that shouldn't matter anymore. The window frame lay in pieces across the floor near the sink, glass and splintered wood in a rough fan shape, and through the gap where the window used to be, the night came into the kitchen like it had been waiting for an invitation. It smelled like salt and wet rock and something colder underneath, coming down off the bluff. I lay there and let it move over me. 6 months in this house, and I had kept the heat up too high out of habit, out of some idea that a cold house was a house nobody lived in anymore. Now the cold just came in, and nobody stopped it. Colton had gone down the hall toward the back bedroom, and I heard the door there settle shut. Not closed hard, just pulled to. He hadn't said anything else. There wasn't anything else to say, I supposed. He'd told me what I needed to know to make the decision, and I'd made it. And now there was nothing left between us but the specifics, and the specifics could wait for morning. I was alone in the kitchen with the wreckage of the door frame hanging half off its hinges, and the cabinet under the sink dented where something had gone into it during the fight, and I didn't try to think past any of it. Not the training that started tomorrow, not what Colton's people looked like after years of it, not what the deep forest people had looked like before they stopped looking like anything at all. I just lay there on the couch with my eyes open in the dark, and the wound on my back kept burning in that same slow rhythm it had held for an hour now, hot and patient, like a coal someone had banked instead of let go out. I put 2 fingers against my own wrist without deciding to. My heartbeat was there, steady, but I could feel it in my fingertips too, a small separate pulse in each one, which wasn't a thing that was supposed to happen. I didn't say anything about it. There was nobody to say it to. That was when I heard the footsteps. They came up faint at first, under the surf, easy to mistake for the rhythm of the waves themselves, but they had a different weight to them, flatter, more even, a sound with intention in it instead of tide. I lay still and listened until I was sure. Someone was walking on the beach below the bluff, back and forth, the same stretch of sand each time, slow and unhurried, like a man checking a fence line before he goes to bed, except it wasn't a man. I understood that without having to think about it very hard. I had seen what came through the window an hour before, the size of it, the way it moved faster than something that size should move, and I understood that whatever was down there on the black sand tonight was the same thing, walking the base of the seawall in long, even passes, from one end of it to the other, and back again. I didn't get up to look. I thought about it, the old habit of curiosity that used to send me down to the beach with my father's binoculars whenever a fishing boat sat too long offshore, but I let it go. There wasn't anything I needed to see. I only needed to hear it, and I could hear it clearly enough through the broken window, each footfall landing soft and certain on wet sand, then the small pause at the end of each pass before the rhythm turned and started back the other way. The forest was 40 yards behind the house, dense enough in daylight to swallow the sun 50 feet in, and for 3 days now it had sat back there being nothing but trees to me, old growth I hadn't paid any attention to since the day my father's ashes went into the ground and I stopped paying attention to much of anything. It wasn't nothing anymore. It had a shape to it now, a weight, the way a locked door has a weight even when nothing on the other side of it is making a sound. But there was no sound coming from the tree line tonight. There was only the surf, and under the surf, back and forth, that patient, unhurried walking. I understood, lying there, that the walking was the reason I could lie there at all. That the house had stopped being just a house sometime in the last hour, had become a line drawn on the ground with the ocean on one side of it and the forest on the other, and that something not quite human had taken up the job of walking that line so the rest of us could close our eyes. Nobody had told me that in so many words. I just knew it, the way you know a held breath by the ache when you finally let it go. The wound kept its heat. I stopped checking my pulse in my fingers and just let it sit there, present and unmistakable. A fact about myself that hadn't been true 3 days ago and now simply was. The cold air kept coming through the broken window in slow, steady pushes, carrying the ocean in with it, and underneath the ocean, always, the footsteps, down the length of the seawall. A pause, back again, down the length of the seawall. A pause, back again. The same line held all night, as if the person walking it had all the time in the world and intended to spend every bit of it right there. I lay on the wrecked couch in my father's wrecked kitchen with the night moving through the hole where the window used to be, and I listened to her walk that line back and forth below the bluff, slow and deliberate, the sand taking her weight and giving it back in that same steady sound. And I did not sleep.